Mary, what does authentic assessment mean to you?
To me, authentic assessment is about using assessment practice in any kind of learning of any kind of subject in a way that gives it context, that actually embeds it in a way that's useful, not only for the learner, but also for the educator, so that both of you can learn from that process, but also the authenticity of the assessment itself helps the learner to actually situate their learning. So about actually being able to use your learning in a way to show what you've learned, show what you've understood through an assessment that has some kind of applicability to you. I'll give you an example. In our master's course for one of the modules, I get students to write a policy review of an assessment. And I would call that an authentic assessment because they have to write a properly structured policy paper. And that's something they might go on to do when they leave university. So it also has future applicability too.
What are the practical steps that an educator can take in trying to make their assessments more authentic?
It's a case of reviewing what you do. And most educators do that. It's part of the natural teaching cycle. You look at what you're teaching, you look at how it's working at any one time, reflect upon, where are we in learning about X subject? What do we need to do next? And I think it is giving some time and some thought to what do you want students to get out of this? How are they going to apply it to the assessment? And also just, is it appropriate? Sometimes it might not be the most appropriate way to assess something. So it's really contextually based and there's no hard and fast rules. But I think as a subject expert, you will get to understand that sense of when something is right in terms of placing it in a very authentic, applicable context.
What would your advice be to an academic who wants to use a greater variety of either assessment instruments or question types, or perhaps even both in their assessments, but doesn't know where to start?
I'd go right back to the beginning. I'd go to the fundamentals of your programme. Actually think about your curriculum, think about if it's a module you're thinking about re-evaluating, actually sit down and spend some time looking at it. What's the content of this? Has it changed? Does it need to change? What are your students looking like? The other thing I would do then is I would actually spend time with the students that I have now, talk to them about it, talk to them about their experience. What would they like to see? What would work for them? It might not be that you can apply those things with those students now, and usually in universities you can't. Validation or change of that kind takes usually a year or so to actually bring forward. But you can still use them as part of the process, and that's really important to get that feed in. And then I think the other thing is that most universities now have teaching and learning support staff, so it's also making use of those staff to actually help you think about what would that look like, help you redesign the assessments that you're doing, to rethink what that could look like. I think the really important thing is to just not feel you have to do it all on your own. Get stuck in, by all means, read around the subject and make changes or propose changes. But it's really important that it's seen as a collective endeavour.
Mary, what is a question bank, and how can a faculty or module team, or indeed an entire institution, use them more effectively?
So a question bank is basically a collection of questions. Now, they might be on one subject, or they might be on a particular theme, or they might have a particular structure. It really depends the context within which you're using them. But I think the really important thing to remember about a question bank generally as well is if we use that term broadly in assessment, what we mean is we have verified the items that are in that question bank. And by items, that's the technical term used in assessment for questions. So we would expect every item in a question bank to have been verified, that it's been checked. Is it a reliable item? Is it something we can trust? Is it something we're going to use once? Are we going to use it a lot of times? And then it's actually thinking, how do you construct that question bank to apply in a range of settings? It depends what you want to do with it. You can have a question bank where you simply store questions and then you just select from them if you want to, say, use them for essays. If you want to use an item bank for, say, a computer adaptive testing system, then you're going to have to create a really, really big bank of questions because they're going to be drawn from at random by a computer using a particular algorithm so that it can select questions appropriate to the candidates sitting the test. That's essentially how we conceptualise a question bank. So it's got to be verified and they've got to be items that are applicable to the subject and the context that you're teaching.
In higher education, students are often asked to write essays or write longer pieces of work. Modules are sometimes assessed by the number of words that a student writes. This is perhaps to the detriment of other question types, such as multiple choice. Why is there such a feeling that writing lots of words is good and multiple choice is bad? And should it be different?
I think what we're looking at here is a very long history of what an assessment is. You can go right back to the Han Dynasty in China and see people writing long essays. I mean, then these were essays that got you places in the Chinese civil service, and people wrote essays over days and days. And actually we inherited that culture. You know, it spread around the world, and we began to use the essay as the kind of gold standard for how we were going to assess people's knowledge. It's a very efficient way of assessing people because you need a relatively short space of time, a big room, you put everyone in it, get them to write furiously for a couple of hours. So in terms of economics, it's quite a good model. But obviously, it is only one way of thinking about how someone can show what they know. And I think you're absolutely right. We have a tendency in assessment, I always call this the bad binary, to say that one thing's good, another thing's bad. And again, it isn't that simple. It's all down to context. Sometimes it might be that you could actually create a multiple choice series of questions that were just ideal or perfect for anything. It really depends what you want to know and how you want to know that and how you want to evidence that learning. But I think, again, it's difficult. You know, human beings don't like change. I've written quite a lot about this. Academics in particular don't like change, and they particularly don't like change in assessment. And often that's not simply because they're just being awkward. It's because this stuff is difficult. It's difficult to manage, it's difficult to change, and it's difficult to grasp sometimes. How are we going to do this differently? So this is all about this theme that I keep coming back to on assessment literacy. The more we can give people confidence, the more they might wish to try a different style, a different mode of assessment, or a different way of thinking about something.
If someone has assessed by way of an essay or a piece of coursework for a number of years and actually thinks, I'd like to look at other question types, what is it that they need to consider in working out whether something that is inherently would be suitable for assessing in a different way, whether they should look at multiple choice or whether they should look at whatever else might be out there? How would they make that determination?
Well, I think the first thing is they need to actually learn something about it. It's about educating yourself in processes of assessment. Actually, there's plenty out there. There's lots and lots of literature on this. There's lots of books on it. There's some really great resources available online too. And go and have a look at that. Have a look, particularly within higher education. Look at what people are doing in your subject in other universities. So see what people are doing. Share good practice. Commonly in higher education, one thing we do is we externally examine programmes for one another. And often it's really interesting that some people see that role as very much a box-ticking exercise, that I'm going in to check their grades are applicable and comparable to the kind of grading or marking or assessing I would do on my programme. I see it completely differently. I see external examining as my opportunity to go in and learn, share my understanding with others, but also learn from others too. And for us as a community in higher education to be able to actually share expertise better.